Welcome to Tochi Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The walls of the Okoye mansion sparkled, but for Amarachi, they had long lost their shine. To the world, she had it all: beauty, brains, billionaire blood. Yet in the quiet moments when no camera flashed and no socialite circled her for influence, Amarachi sat alone, drowning in silence wealth couldn't cure. Her father, Chief Ignatius Okoye, owned half the real estate in the city and a controlling stake in several industries, but he had lost the ability to see his daughter beyond her value. Amarachi's mother died when she was a child, leaving her to grow up in boardrooms, at business dinners, and within expectations too heavy for a young girl. From the moment she turned 18, suitors lined up with flowers in hand and hidden greed in their eyes. It wasn't long before she met Tobe, handsome, articulate, and cunningly attentive. He knew exactly what to say to earn her trust. He became everything: her first love, her confidant, and eventually her fiancé. But it was all a facade. Tobe had been planted, carefully chosen by one of her father's competitors to seduce, manipulate, and steal her trust, and with it, confidential documents from her father's empire. When the betrayal came to light, it didn't just break her heart, it shattered her identity. Amarachi remembered the day her father stormed into her room, eyes filled with fury, demanding why she had allowed love to blind her. "You're not a child, Amarachi," he had roared. "You were born to protect this legacy, not give it away to vultures." But she hadn't given anything away. Tobe had taken it, through carefully planted words, subtle emotional manipulation, and a charm so disarming she didn't see the poison until it had seeped into everything. From that moment on, Amarachi learned to be silent. She went through the motions of being the perfect daughter, sat through board meetings with her father, smiled at events, and nodded at suitors she had no intention of entertaining. But her heart had closed. Every man who came after Tobe either wanted her name, her money, or the power her presence brought. None of them asked what she wanted. None of them ever saw her. On the night of her 27th birthday, after yet another dinner with distant royals attempting to secure political marriage, Amarachi sat alone on her terrace, watching the stars. Her thoughts drifted back to a memory she hadn't touched in years, her mother's voice telling her, "If a man ever loves you with nothing to gain, you'll know." That night, the idea struck her like lightning. What if she could strip herself of everything? Name, fortune, image. What if she disappeared from high society and became someone else entirely? A nobody. Would someone still choose her? Not the CEO's daughter, not the future heiress, just Amarachi? The idea consumed her, filling her with a fire she hadn't felt since she was a child. She knew it was dangerous. She knew her father would never approve. But for once in her life, she didn't want permission. She wanted freedom. And for the first time in years, she smiled. Because she was going to take it. The town of Obel wasn't on any travel magazine's radar. It was quiet, remote, and modest, just what Amarachi needed. Her transformation was meticulous. With the help of her father's discreet legal aid, Barrister Nduka, she forged a new identity under the name Ama Yugachukwu. Her designer wardrobe was replaced with second-hand skirts and plain blouses. Her straight, luxurious extensions were swapped for simple braids. But the centerpiece of her disguise was a wheelchair. Amarachi paid handsomely for forged medical records indicating a spinal injury from a market truck accident. Her backstory became that of a scholarship student sent to Obel's community library through a charity initiative. It was perfect. In a town where no one cared about corporate empires, she could be invisible, seen only for who she was willing to show. Settling into her new life was not easy. Every morning, she wheeled herself to the dusty little library where she cataloged books, helped curious children, and occasionally hosted reading hours. She had always loved literature, something she never had time to explore in her former life of strategy meetings and investment briefings. Now, she spent afternoons with novels on her lap and silence in her ears. And though her muscles ached from pretending to be immobile, there was a strange peace in being unseen. The people of Obel greeted her with respect, but not fear. She wasn't called Ma or Madam, just Amma. At night, she would lock the library office door, rise from her wheelchair, and stretch her legs, aching from hours of restriction. The lie pressed heavy on her chest, but it also protected her. No one would ever imagine that the girl in patched slippers and borrowed bookshelves was once photographed beside the governor. It was during one of her library shifts that she first saw him, Chitara. The sound of metal striking metal rang from the forge nearby, and curiosity led her outside. Under the weight of the afternoon sun stood a man in a faded vest, hammering a glowing rod of iron on an anvil. His back was broad, skin glistening with sweat, eyes focused with quiet rage. There was something almost poetic about the rhythm of his work. He didn't notice her at first, until a group of boys teasingly shouted, "See that crippled girl always staring like spirit." Chitara turned, his brows furrowed, and calmly walked over. With no words, he stared the boys down, shaming them into silence. Then he turned to her. "Don't let them define you by what they see," he said simply. "People like them only see the chair." Then he walked away. In that moment, Amarachi felt a shiver. Not from attraction, though he was undeniably handsome, but from recognition. Someone had spoken to her, not her disguise. And for the first time in years, she felt seen. Their conversations began in fragments. Chitara would pass by the library on his way to the forge, nodding without words. Then came the occasional good morning, followed by short exchanges about the weather, the town, or the books on her desk. Slowly, their fragments became threads that began to stitch a strange warmth into her days. Chitara wasn't like anyone Amarachi had met in her elite world. He was firm, direct, and utterly uninterested in impressing anyone. His blacksmith shop was humble but alive with craft. He made tools, gates, sculptures, even ornate candle holders. One day, he wheeled her into the workshop, handed her a half-carved metal flower, and said, "Beauty's not in the petals. It's in the fire it survives." That line stayed with her for days. Chitara, too, was changing. There was something about Amma's eyes that disturbed his peace. They didn't look like they belonged in Obel. They held pain, depth, and the quiet intelligence of someone who had seen too much too early. He tried to ignore the pull, telling himself that her presence was a distraction. But every time she laughed, a soft, genuine sound, his forge grew quieter. He didn't know her past, but he saw her spirit. He once told her about his father, a proud man who had lost everything after a contract with a corrupt city company destroyed their business. "They came in suits, promised everything, and left us with nothing," he had said, his jaw clenched. "All because my father didn't understand their world of lies." Amarachi's chest tightened when he said the name of the company, Okoye Holdings. She said nothing, holding her breath and her secret. The more time they spent together, the more dangerous Amarachi's feelings became. She knew this couldn't last. What began as a plan to find truth had turned into something raw and real. Chitara made her laugh. He made her think. And worst of all, he made her dream. But her secret pressed heavier with each smile. One evening, after everyone had gone, she locked the library doors, pulled herself from the wheelchair, and paced in the dark, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I didn't plan to fall for you," she whispered into the shadows. "But I did, and I'm scared." Outside, under the moonlight, Chitara hammered away, shaping metal like truth, hot, painful, and impossible to hide forever. The days melted into something golden and dangerous. Amarachi would wheel herself to the forge in the evenings under the excuse of borrowing books for Chitara's younger siblings. But they both knew the truth. It was no longer about books or metal. It was about presence. She watched him work with his bare hands, eyes focused, breath steady as fire bent to his will. He was sculpting a garden gate for the community school and had carved intricate patterns into it. Patterns she couldn't help but stare at for hours. One afternoon, without saying a word, Chitara handed her a small wooden box. Inside it lay a handcrafted stand made of steel and polished wood, a book holder engraved with tiny roses. Her name wasn't on it, but she felt it. "You deserve to read without holding pain," he said. Her heart trembled. It was the first time since her mother's death that someone gave her something without wanting a thing in return. She smiled through the ache. What would he do if he knew the truth? Every night was now a war of conscience. The lie she had built to protect her heart was becoming a prison. Amarachi found herself crying in silence more than she ever had, not because of guilt alone, but because she finally wanted to be known. She wanted Chitara to know the woman beneath the braids and wheelchair, the woman who once flew in private jets and dined with ministers, the woman who owned luxury clothes she now dared not touch. But fear choked her. The moment she stood up, the dream would die. Would he still love her when he knew she was one of them? The rich, the untouchable, the daughter of the very man whose empire had allegedly destroyed Chitara's father? The pain in his voice when he spoke about the Okoye betrayal never left her mind. How could she confess and still keep his heart? And yet, the more she delayed, the more her soul burned. One night, she stood in her small rented room, her hands trembling, her feet aching from long hours of forced stillness. "You're a coward," she whispered to herself. "You're just like them, hiding behind power and fear." The village continued to buzz with their silent romance. People started to notice the long stares, and the way Chitara gently pushed her wheelchair through the market or bought her fresh oranges without being asked. Old women smiled behind their wrappers, whispering, "That blacksmith's heart is lost, oh." But neither Amarachi nor Chitara said a word about feelings. One evening, as the sky darkened and a gentle harmattan breeze swept through Obel, Chitara wheeled her under a mango tree near the forge. "Sometimes I feel like you're running from something," he said, his voice low. "But I won't ask. When you're ready, Amma, just tell me what you want me to know." Her eyes welled, and she turned her face away. "Thank you," she whispered, gripping the armrests of the chair like they were anchors. In that moment, she knew something had changed. He wasn't rushing her. He was giving her space to choose, something no man had ever done. And that terrified her even more. Chitara had always kept his past buried deep, but the more time he spent with Amma, the more he began to speak of things he once swore to forget. They were seated outside the forge one quiet evening, stars peeking through purple clouds, the fire from the furnace reduced to embers. "You know," he began, brushing soot from his hands, "my father died of a stroke. Not because of age or sickness, but because of betrayal." Amarachi froze. He continued, voice steady but dark. He ran a small but thriving welding company in the city. One day, a representative from Okoye Holdings came, promised him funding, expansion, contracts. My father, proud and loyal, gave everything, blueprints, designs, assets. They took it all. Then they backed out of the deal, citing market instability, and set up their own plant across town with his ideas. Within a year, we were homeless. He never recovered. Amarachi felt the air leave her lungs. She stared at the ground, unable to meet his eyes. He didn't know. He couldn't know. The man he was talking about, Chief Ignatius Okoye, was her father. And if there was even a hint of truth to what Chitara said, then Amarachi wasn't just hiding her name. She was hiding a legacy soaked in pain. She wanted to speak, to explain, to ask for his side of the story in full. But she knew the moment she opened that door, everything would change. Her lie would not just be a personal betrayal. It would be a symbol of the very corruption Chitara had spent his life fighting. She began to tremble. I'm sorry," she stammered. He looked at her, puzzled. "You didn't do it," he said with a shrug, not knowing how much truth his words carried. She forced a smile and asked him to tell her more about his mother. Anything to change the subject. But the seed of truth had been planted, and it was growing rapidly inside her, twisting everything. That night, Amarachi couldn't sleep. She sat on the floor, unwrapping an old photograph from her wallet, the only picture she kept of her mother and father together. Her mother, graceful and gentle, had always told her to use her wealth to lift others. Was this what they had built their empire on? Stealing from men like Chitara's father? Or was there more to the story? She thought about confronting her father. But how? And would it even matter now that she had walked away from that life? Her fingers shook as she traced the edges of the photo. "God," she whispered, "what have I gotten myself into?" She wanted to believe that her father had built his empire with honor. But now, more than ever, she had to face the terrifying possibility that love could be her undoing, and truth might destroy the only pure thing she had found. While Amarachi wrestled with guilt in Obel, a storm was quietly forming in Lagos. Adiz, her older cousin and lifelong rival, stood in the Okoye mansion, staring at Amarachi's untouched seat at the breakfast table. Her envy had reached boiling point. From childhood, she was always the lesser cousin, the daughter of Chief Okoye's late brother, who grew up under their roof, but never inherited his name. Amarachi had it all: the surname, the spotlight, the fortune, and worst of all, the effortless love of everyone around her. Adiz had spent years playing second best, hiding her resentment behind fake smiles. But now that Amarachi had vanished, rumored to be taking time off, Adiz saw an opportunity. She hired a private investigator to track her cousin's location, offering a generous bribe to anyone who could give her a lead. And soon she had it. The photo came through email. Amarachi in plain clothes, hair in simple braids, pushing a stack of books into a rural library. Adiz nearly laughed in disbelief. So that's what she's doing? Playing peasant, she muttered. But what caught her eye was not just the disguise. It was the man standing behind her, subtly watching. Tall, dark, strong. A nobody. Adiz zoomed in and scowled. And she's fallen for someone? She sensed it immediately. Envy flared. Amarachi hadn't just left her title. She had found something Adiz had always longed for: real love. Not political alliances, not corporate admiration. Love without condition. And that, more than anything, made her furious. Adiz called a private driver and packed a suitcase. If Amarachi wanted to live in a fairy tale, she would make sure it turned into a nightmare. By the time Adiz arrived in Obel, she had mastered her mask. Dressed in simple clothes and carrying a fake concern, she introduced herself to the librarian as a family member checking on my cousin. She wept dramatically about how the family missed Amarachi, how her father was ill with worry. Amarachi was stunned to see her. "What are you doing here?" she asked coldly. "You left without telling anyone," Adiz replied sweetly. "I came to see if you're okay." But beneath her words were knives. She quickly identified Chitara and struck up conversation with him, pretending to admire his work. "You know," she told him slyly, "Amma has always had a thing for village men. But she always moves on when her phase ends." The poison had begun to spread. And though Amarachi could sense her cousin's real intentions, she had no idea that this was only the beginning. Adiz hadn't come to take her home. She had come to destroy everything Amarachi had built, including her heart. Adiz returned to Lagos with a venomous plan carefully brewing in her mind. Watching Amarachi blend into village life had both shocked and disgusted her. "So this is how she protects her heart, by hiding it in poverty," she scoffed. But what intrigued her most wasn't Amarachi's pathetic disguise. It was Chitara. His quiet strength, the raw beauty in his hands, the honor in his eyes. Adiz had never seen a man like him. And the fact that he had fallen for her cousin, despite not knowing who she really was, enraged her even more. This wasn't just about Amarachi anymore. This was about proving that Adiz, too, could take anything Amarachi cherished. She contacted her father's estate manager and arranged for a job opening in Lagos under a new luxury renovation wing funded by Okoye Holdings. Then she sent a messenger to Obel with an offer letter, carefully worded to sound like it had come from an anonymous patron who admired Chitara's skill. The pay was 10 times what he made. The project would take him to Lagos. Chitara was hesitant at first. He told Amma about the offer while watching her catalog books in the library. "Someone saw my work and wants me in Lagos. Big client. Private estate project," he said quietly. "It could change things for my family." Amarachi felt her throat close. Lagos? Her world? She masked her panic with a smile. "You deserve it," she said, though her heart was pounding. "You've worked so hard." She didn't dare reveal that Lagos wasn't just a big city. It was her battlefield. But Chitara noticed her unease. "You sure you're okay?" he asked. She nodded and swallowed her fear. In truth, she was terrified. What if he found out who she was? What if he walked into the Okoye estate and saw her name on marble walls? But Amarachi had no idea that Adiz had orchestrated the entire job to make that exact thing happen. She wanted Chitara not only to be confused, but to feel betrayed. The final blow came days later when Chitara left Obel with a quiet promise: "I'll come back when it's done. I just want to build something real for once." Back in Lagos, Adiz welcomed Chitara personally at the estate site, dressed in a modest blouse and soft makeup. "We're so grateful to have you," she purred. "My cousin used to speak of you." She watched him stiffen. "Ama?" he asked. Adiz smiled. "Yes, Amarachi. She's my cousin." Surprised. He didn't respond. He looked shaken, as if the two worlds he had once seen as opposites had just collided. Adiz continued to manipulate gently. "She never told you who she really was, did she?" Chitara remained silent, his face unreadable. Over the next few days, she slowly dripped poison into his ear, painting Amarachi as a spoiled heiress playing a cruel joke in Obel. She wanted to feel poor for a while, Adiz whispered one night. "You were part of her experiment." The seed was planted, and as Chitara worked late hours in the mansion, he began to wonder, had he really fallen in love with a lie? The Okoye estate was a palace of secrets, but for Chitara, it had become a tomb of confusion. He spent his days sculpting elegant iron frames and ornamental chandeliers for a new ballroom wing, but his nights were haunted by questions. How could the woman he loved be tied to this place of luxury? How could she lie so deeply and convincingly, smiling, laughing, loving, while knowing her very name carried the weight of everything he despised? Every corridor he walked through carried echoes of wealth, entitlement, and betrayal. And Adiz was always there, lingering like perfume. She offered him tea. She watched him work. She complimented his strength. But what began to chill Chitara was how she never pushed. She simply waited, letting his silence do the work. One evening, as they stood in the partially renovated wing, she leaned on a pillar and whispered, "I used to think my cousin was special, but now I just see a girl who runs from herself." Then she walked away, leaving him in silence. The trap came a week later. Adiz knew that patience was her weapon. She waited until the estate's gemstone shipment arrived, meant for the interior designs of the CEO's private safe room. As expected, they were stored temporarily in the maintenance vault. She then executed her plan with surgical precision. That evening, she approached Chitara casually. "Could you check the storeroom next to the east wing?" she asked. "Some of the rods for the wall fixtures are missing." He agreed. Inside the storeroom, he found everything in order, until security stormed in. The gems had been hidden under one of his toolboxes. The supervisor was furious. "You're lucky we caught you before you escaped," the man growled. Chitara was stunned. He tried to explain, but nothing made sense. The evidence was overwhelming. Even the CCTV footage was missing a key minute, carefully edited by Adiz through her tech assistant. The next morning, he was taken into custody. Headlines ran across local blogs. "Village craftsman caught stealing from Billionaire estate." Amarachi found out 2 days later through a WhatsApp message from Mama Ifeoma. Her hands trembled as she clicked the news link, and her heart shattered. Chitara, arrested, accused. She couldn't breathe. She tried to call, but his number was inactive. She tried to reach Barrister Nduka, but he was on assignment. In the quiet of her room, she sobbed like a wounded child. The man she loved had walked unknowingly into the world she had run from, and it had crushed him. She knew immediately it was a setup. Adiz. It had to be. But what could she do? If she revealed herself now, it would look like interference. If she stayed quiet, Chitara would suffer. For the first time in her life, Amarachi faced a truth she could no longer deny. Her silence had protected her, but it had destroyed him. And somehow she had to make it right. As Amarachi spiraled in guilt and desperation, Tobe returned like a ghost resurrected. He arrived unannounced at the Okoye mansion, well-groomed and carrying an aura of scripted humility. "I came when I heard Amarachi was hurting," he told Chief Okoye in the sitting room, hands folded, voice soft. "I never stopped loving her. The timing was perfect." Chief Okoye, still skeptical of Chitara and increasingly concerned about his daughter's emotional stability, welcomed Tobe's presence. "You hurt her once," the chief warned. "You won't get a second chance." Tobe bowed his head. "I've changed, sir. I came to make it right." Behind the scenes, he and Adiz had already reconnected, both burned by the Okoye Empire in different ways, both hungry for power. Their plan was simple: manipulate Amarachi back into Tobe's arms, gain the chief's blessing, and slowly seize control of the estate's leadership and inheritance. Tobe wasted no time. He tracked Amarachi to her private guest house and appeared at the doorstep with flowers and a notebook of sketches he claimed he had made during their engagement. "I wanted to come sooner," he lied, "but I didn't think I deserved you after what I did." Amarachi stared at him, stunned. Her voice was small. "What are you doing here?" He smiled. "Saving us." And for a moment, just a moment, Amarachi's mind faltered. She was raw, emotionally wounded, and desperate for comfort. Tobe knew this. He didn't push too hard. He sat, listened, apologized for the past, and promised he wasn't asking for a second chance, only a chance to be there for her. The deception was smooth, too smooth. But Amarachi, torn and exhausted, allowed it. She even thanked him. Meanwhile, Chitara sat alone in a holding cell, unaware that the man who once betrayed Amarachi was now walking through her life again, wearing the face of redemption. Adiz watched it all unfold with satisfaction. She and Tobe met in secret every few nights to review the next phase. "She's folding faster than I thought," Tobe grinned. "Grief is a useful key." Adiz didn't laugh. Her eyes lingered on Tobe longer than they should have. There was something about him that still pulled at her. Maybe it was because he once belonged to Amarachi, or maybe because she'd never had anyone look at her the way men looked at her cousin. But Tobe never noticed. To him, Adiz was just a tool, a brilliant one, yes, but still a means to an end. And so, while Amarachi cried into Tobe's arms about Chitara, the trap continued to tighten. And the one person who could expose it all sat in silence behind prison bars, forgotten, isolated, and broken, but not for long. The cell was cold, damp, and suffocating, not just from the moldy walls, but from the weight pressing down on Chitara's soul. Days passed without visitors, without explanation. The guards only offered the same phrase: "The estate has issued a report. Your lawyer can take it up." He didn't have a lawyer. He didn't have anyone. At night, he would lie awake on a thin mattress, the scent of sweat and despair thick in the air, replaying every detail from the estate. The toolbox. The look in the guard's eyes. The moment they pulled out the gemstone pouch he had never seen before. And the worst part, the voice in his head that kept whispering. She knew. She knew who she was. She knew where she brought him. The betrayal didn't hurt because of what they accused him of. It hurt because the only woman who had made him feel worthy had watched him walk into a lion's den and said nothing. He remembered her face, the fake innocence, the way she would look at him like he was the only man in the world. And now, knowing what he knew, those looks felt like mockery. He knew what Okoye Holdings had done to his father. The betrayal had broken a proud man, driven him into a slow death. Now it had come full circle. His son, trusting again, had walked straight into the same pit. And it was her, Amarachi, whoever she was. Chitara banged his fist on the wall until his knuckles bled, then slumped into the corner. The silence after was worse than the rage. Days blended into nights. Meals came and went, tasteless and cold. The newspapers on the warden's desk carried headlines about the case. Billionaire family heir betrayed by village lover, complete with a blurred photo of him in handcuffs. They painted him as a gold digger, a fraud. And Amarachi? She hadn't come. No letters. No visits. No word. She had vanished, just like the lies she had built. But even in the deepest pain, a flicker of clarity formed. Maybe it had all been a performance. Maybe she had chosen him just to feel powerful. Maybe she needed someone beneath her to test if she could be loved without her crown. And when he passed the test, she gave him a sentence instead of a reward. Still, something didn't fully add up. He remembered the way she looked at him when they sat under the mango tree. There was something in her eyes that night. Not arrogance, not deceit. Something else. Pain, guilt, fear. That confusion kept him from fully hating her. He held onto that thread like a lifeline, not out of hope, but to avoid drowning in bitterness. Then, one afternoon, as the rain poured outside his cell window, a guard walked up with a message. Someone left you a note. No name, just a folded page, smuggled into the prison through unknown hands. Chitara opened it slowly, and his entire world cracked open once more. The letter was written in soft blue ink on old floral paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. Amarachi's. It wasn't long or dramatic. Just a simple note filled with the kind of raw emotion Chitara hadn't allowed himself to believe anymore. I'm sorry. You were never part of my plan. But you became the only part one wanted to keep. I didn't come to destroy you. I came to find myself. And I lost everything when I let you walk into my world. Chitara stared at it for minutes, the paper trembling in his calloused hands. It wasn't a declaration of innocence, nor a request for forgiveness. It was just pain laid bare. And in that pain, something stirred in him. The woman he had fallen for wasn't a villain. She was broken too, lied to by her own world, punished for wanting to escape. Maybe she wasn't the daughter of Okoye Holdings when she loved him. Maybe in those moments she was just Ama. The letter had been smuggled in by Mama Ifeoma, the quiet, observant maid who had served in the Okoye mansion for over 2 decades. She had always kept her head down, spoken only when necessary, and listened even when ignored. But she had been watching everything, from the moment Adiz returned to Lagos to when Chitara was accused. She had seen Adiz's shift in demeanor, the secret meetings with Tobe, and the security footage inconsistencies. And more than anything, she had seen Amarachi's quiet collapse. She stopped eating. Mama Ifeoma whispered one day to the guard who let her pass the letter. She walks like her shadow, weighs more than her body. The maid knew pain. She had seen many powerful people fall, but Amarachi's fall was different. It came from love, not arrogance. And Mama Ifeoma made a decision. If no one else would help Amarachi, she would. Because sometimes it takes the ones the world ignores to expose those it praises. Back in the Okoye mansion, Mama Ifeoma began digging quietly. She visited the security room during night shifts, watched the hallway footage from the night the gemstones were planted. She noticed something odd, a brief flicker, a 1-minute blackout, and Adiz entering the East Wing corridor seconds before the theft alert. She didn't confront anyone. Not yet. Instead, she began to build her own file, copying footage onto a USB stick, printing call logs, and transcribing what she overheard in the hallway. She was old, but she had one advantage. People never noticed the help. One night, she watched from a distance as Tobe kissed Amarachi's forehead and led her inside. The girl looked empty, haunted. The smile on her face wasn't real. Mama Ifeoma wept that night, not because Amarachi was fooled again, but because love had made a queen act like a prisoner. And Mama Ifeoma would not let that injustice stay hidden. Not again. As the days dragged on, Adiz watched her plan unfold with smug satisfaction. Chitara was behind bars. Amarachi had grown more dependent on Tobe, and the whispers among board members had already begun about Amarachi's poor judgment, her mental instability, her obsession with outsiders. It was working. Everything she had been denied for years, power, control, and attention, was finally within reach. She wore more silk now, took more board calls on behalf of her uncle, and even began signing minor contracts with his verbal approval. But power without love was hollow. And though she tried to hide it, Tobe's increasing emotional distance started to sting. He barely responded to her messages unless it was about strategy. He stopped flirting, stopped complimenting her. Then she saw it with her own eyes. Tobe walking out of one of the guest rooms, shirt half-buttoned, grinning with the same charm he once used on Amarachi, this time aimed at a younger administrative assistant. That night, Adiz confronted him. Her voice shook. "You're using me. You used her, and now you're using me." Tobe didn't flinch. He simply sipped his wine and shrugged. What did you expect, Adiz? That I'd fall in love with you? This isn't a fairy tale. We had a plan. You bring the access, I bring the charm. That's it. Her face paled, then flushed. You don't get to speak to me like that. I'm not one of your girls, she snapped. No, he said coldly. You're worse. At least they know what they are. You think you're special. But you're just another pawn who wanted what Amarachi had. The words were like knives. Adiz staggered back, her chest heaving. For a moment, she didn't see herself in a mirror. She saw her cousin. She saw everything she had mocked Amarachi for becoming. And suddenly, she wasn't angry. She was ashamed. But the shame didn't cleanse her, it consumed her. Hours later, drunk and spiraling, Adiz stormed into her room, shoving perfume bottles off her dresser, knocking down photo frames, and screaming into the empty walls. She sat on the cold floor, her mascara running down her cheeks, her body shaking. And when Mama Ifioma walked in to clean the mess, she didn't chase her away. She crumbled into the old maid's arms like a child. He never loved me, she cried. No one ever does. They all loved her. Amarachi. Always her. I just wanted something that was mine. Mama Ifioma held her, saying nothing, her eyes wide. Then, in between sobs, Adiz began to confess. How she had framed Chitara. How she edited the footage. How Tobe manipulated Amarachi. Every detail poured out like poison, until the maid had enough truth to burn down the entire estate. And as she gently laid Adiz into bed, she whispered, Rest, my dear. You've just handed back a throne that never belonged to you. When Adiz woke the next morning, she didn't remember everything she had said, only the feeling of devastation, betrayal, and being broken beyond repair. Her head throbbed from the wine, her eyes swollen from the tears, but the worst ache sat deep in her chest. Still wrapped in the sheets, she sat staring at her reflection for minutes that felt like hours. For the first time in her life, she saw herself stripped of ambition, makeup, and manipulation. What was left was a woman who had tried to take her cousin's crown, and failed. A woman who had always wanted to be loved like Amarachi, but never could be. What Tobe said still rang in her ears. You're just another pawn who wanted what Amarachi had. The words were cruel, but painfully true. She hadn't just tried to ruin Amarachi's life. She had tried to be Amarachi. And now, the throne she thought she had conquered was crumbling beneath her. She wandered into the hallway with her silk robe dragging behind her, nearly bumping into Tobe as he exited the administrative assistant's room. He looked at her without remorse, only slight irritation, like she was an inconvenience. You should sleep that off, he said casually, then walked past her. Something inside her snapped. She turned, rage coursing through her like lightning, and stormed into the main lounge, grabbing a vase and hurling it at the floor. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the house. Her voice rose next, an angry, broken scream. You think you can use me and walk away? You think I'll be silent forever? Tobe didn't even turn back. Instead, he laughed softly and said, Go ahead, Adiz. Scream. No one believes you anyway. His nonchalance pierced her deeper than any insult. Because he was right. No one had ever taken her seriously. She had always been the background girl, the helper, the bitter cousin. Even her victory had been built through lies and theft. And now that everything was slipping, she didn't know who she was anymore. Just empty. She retreated back to her room, slammed the door, and collapsed to the floor again. But this time, she didn't cry. She just sat there, numb. The confession from the night before was still fresh in Mama Ifioma's ears, but Adiz was too lost in shame to remember saying it. Meanwhile, in another wing of the estate, Amarachi was silent too, watching Tobe from a distance, feeling the shift in her own heart. She couldn't understand why she felt hollow every time he smiled, why she couldn't trust his apologies. Something inside her told her that Tobe hadn't truly changed, even though his words were so carefully crafted. She had trusted too easily before, but this time, her soul wasn't at peace. Deep down, Amarachi felt it. Something was rotting beneath the polished surface, and she would find out what it was, even if it meant reopening every wound she had fought so hard to forget. Mama Ifioma had seen many faces in her lifetime, greedy ones, cruel ones, ambitious ones. But she had never seen anything like what unfolded in Adi's room the night before. The confession came not like a boast, but like a wound gushing open. Adi's had clutched her shirt like a drowning child, her sobs uncontrolled, her words slurred but deadly accurate. Every piece of the plot came spilling out. How she paid the technician to edit the footage, how she used an anonymous name to send the estate invitation to Chitara, how she coordinated the placement of the gems in the toolbox, and most of all, how she knew Amarachi was falling in love and simply couldn't stand to see it happen. She had something pure, Adiz wept. I just wanted to ruin it, because I never had it. And she didn't deserve it if I couldn't have it too. Mama Ifioma held her quietly, stroking her hair, though her heart was pounding with righteous fury. The moment Adiz drifted off into a drunken sleep, Mama Ifioma left the room and returned to her own quarters, where she carefully pulled out the tiny voice recorder she always kept in her apron pocket, a habit she developed after surviving a decade in a mansion of secrets. She pressed stop. The red light flickered. The confession had been captured, every word, every sob, every bitter truth. She plugged the recorder into her laptop and backed up the file immediately, saving it on multiple flash drives. Then she took out her handwritten file, the one where she had been documenting everything since Chitara's arrest, timelines, security logs, copied messages from discarded phones, and transcripts of whispered conversations in the hallway. She placed the audio file on top. The last piece of the puzzle was complete. She looked up at the small framed photo of her late husband and whispered, "It's time, Obina. Time to save the girl who tried to love without armor." By morning, Mama Ifioma appeared in Amarachi's private guest wing with a small silver tray. On it sat tea, a folded napkin, and a flash drive tucked into a white envelope. Amarachi barely lifted her head when the door opened. Her eyes were red and her spirit dull. "Good morning, madam," the maid said softly. Amarachi didn't respond. Mama Ifioma set the tray down gently, then sat beside her. "You don't need to speak," she said. "But please listen. Everything you suspect is true. And more." She handed her the flash drive, then placed her hand on Amarachi's. "Your silence protected people. But now, your voice must protect what's left of you." Amarachi blinked. "What's this?" she whispered. "Proof," Mama Ifioma said. "And your way back to the throne they tried to steal from you." And for the first time in days, something flickered in Amarachi's eyes. Not fear, not sadness, but purpose. Amarachi locked the door and inserted the flash drive into her laptop with trembling fingers. The room was dark, her palms sweaty, her breath uneven. As the audio file loaded, she pressed play. What followed felt like a slow, emotional execution. It began with Adiz sobbing, then escalated into incoherent cries and phrases Amarachi could barely comprehend, until they became horrifyingly clear. "I framed him. I made sure the gems were found in his toolbox. I edited the footage myself." Her cousin's voice, once sharp and condescending, now sounded weak and hollow. "He was in the way. I just wanted her to lose the one thing she had that I never could." The confession played on, layering deception over manipulation, envy over betrayal. Amarachi's hands tightened into fists, but she didn't cry. She sat perfectly still, her expression blank, absorbing each line as if it were a prophecy fulfilled. When the audio ended, she leaned back slowly, exhaled, and whispered, "They thought I was weak." The next morning, she rose early, dressed in a fitted dark green Ankara gown with a matching head wrap. No makeup, no jewelry, just poise. She walked into the estate dining room with a quiet authority that made the staff pause. Tobe looked up from his seat and smiled casually. "Amarachi, you're glowing today." She smiled back, soft but unreadable. "It's clarity," she said. "It suits me." Chief Okoye wasn't present, but most of the administrative team was. She sat down, ate quietly, and made no announcement. But when she rose from the table, she turned to Adiz and said, "Can you meet me in the boardroom in 20 minutes? Bring Tobe." Adiz hesitated, then nodded, her body stiffening. Tobe smirked. "Are we discussing your return?" he asked. Amarachi only said something like that. 20 minutes later, they walked into the boardroom, only to see a projector screen set up, a laptop connected, and two legal advisors waiting by the door. "What's this?" Adiz whispered. Amarachi turned to face them, her eyes steady. "This," she said, "is the sound of the truth you buried." She pressed play. The audio echoed through the room like a thunderclap, every sob, every confession, every sickening detail. Adiz's face crumbled in real time, her knees nearly buckling. Tobe's expression turned from confusion to panic, then fury. "This is illegal," he hissed. "This is blackmail." Amarachi turned to him calmly. "Is it?" she asked. "Because I already filed the evidence with the family's legal department and the ethics committee last night." The lawyers by the door stepped forward, presenting signed statements and security footage recovered by Mama Ifioma. "You thought you'd destroy me quietly," Amarachi said, her voice steady and cold. "But I learned from you both how to lie, how to act, and how to win without showing my sword." As Adiz collapsed into a chair sobbing, and Tobe began to pace in denial, Amarachi walked toward the door. "I don't want revenge," she said over her shoulder. "I just want my name back, and I'm taking it." Then she left, not with vengeance in her footsteps, but with thunder in her silence. The annual Okoye Holdings Gala was more than a corporate event. It was a display of legacy, wealth, and power. For decades, it had been Chief Okoye's domain, a space where politicians, investors, and global business leaders mingled over champagne and whispered about the family dynasty. But this year, as crystal chandeliers sparkled over the lavish hall, there was a different energy in the air, one of uncertainty. Whispers swirled about the company's instability, about Amarachi's recent mental decline, and about the rising prominence of Adiz and her partnership with Tobe. Unbeknownst to the guests, those very two were preparing to make their grand announcement, a leadership transition to modernize the company. Tobe had already leaked the press release to selected media outlets. Adiz wore a long emerald gown with a pearl necklace, her face calm, but her heart a battlefield of fear. Deep down, she knew Amarachi wouldn't let this go quietly, but she had no idea how thunderous the response would be. When Amarachi walked in, the room stilled. She wore an elegant navy blue gown, her hair braided up into a crown, no jewelry, no flashy makeup, just the silent confidence of someone who had returned not as a broken heir, but a reborn woman. She greeted her father with a deep bow and a kiss on the cheek. "Trust me," she whispered. Chief Okoye looked confused, but nodded. Amarachi took the stage before Adiz or Tobe could speak, her voice amplified across the hall. "Before we begin tonight's festivities," she said, "I want to share something with you all, a sound clip that will explain everything." Murmurs rippled across the room. She pressed play. The speakers crackled, then rang out with Adiz's recorded confession, raw and unfiltered. As the words played, the mood in the hall shifted from curiosity to horror. Investors turned pale. Journalists started recording. Some guests gasped. Tobe clenched his jaw, while Adiz covered her face, trembling. The moment the audio ended, Amarachi stood still for a second, then simply said, "This is not a family that rewards betrayal." The board of directors began whispering furiously. Chief Okoye stood slowly and walked to the stage, placing a firm hand on his daughter's shoulder. "I believed lies because I forgot who you were," he said softly, the microphone catching every syllable. "But tonight, you reminded me that you're your mother's daughter. Forgive me." The crowd erupted into applause. Security moved swiftly. Tobe was escorted out by police, arrested on grounds of corporate fraud and tampering with board documentation. Adiz was not taken away, but she sat slumped in her chair, her soul stripped bare. As Amarachi walked down the steps of the stage, every camera turned toward her, but she didn't smile for them. She walked straight toward Mama Ifioma, embraced her, and whispered, "You saved my life." For once, it wasn't a headline that crowned her, it was truth. In the aftermath of the gala, Lagos buzzed with scandal. Tobe's arrest made headlines. "Disgraced ex-fiancé of Okoye heiress faces charges," screamed one newspaper. Another read, "Cousin's confession rocks billionaire empire." But inside the Okoye mansion, The storm had quieted into a painful kind of peace. Chief Okoye held a press conference where he publicly acknowledged Amarachi as the only rightful heir, taking full responsibility for doubting her. He called her the future of our legacy. And for the first time in years, Amarachi stood beside her father, not as a pawn, not as a disappointment, but as his equal. Yet, despite the victory, her heart remained heavy. The man she had loved, the man she had broken by hiding, was still in prison, his name smeared while hers was being celebrated. The guilt, though soothed by justice, had not disappeared. Adiz, meanwhile, had gone silent. She remained in her room, not speaking to anyone. Rumors swirled that she was planning to leave the country, but Amarachi doubted it. Adiz had never truly wanted to run. She had wanted to be seen, to be adored. And now, stripped of that mask, she had no identity left to cling to. Amarachi visited her once, bringing a plate of food. Adiz didn't look up. "You won," she whispered. Amarachi shook her head. "I didn't come to win. I came to take back what was mine, and to show you that it never had to be a competition." There was no malice in her voice, just quiet truth. Adiz looked away, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I ruined everything." Amarachi nodded. "And yet, you helped fix it in the end." She placed the plate down and left, never expecting reconciliation, only release. Meanwhile, Amarachi began working with the family's legal team to have Chittera's charges dropped. With the evidence now public, it didn't take long. Within 3 days, the court ordered his immediate release and issued a public apology. But Amarachi didn't attend the court hearing. She couldn't. Not yet. Instead, she wrote him a letter. "I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope for the chance to give you back your name and maybe someday your peace." When Chittera stepped out of the courtroom, the sun hit his face with a warmth he hadn't felt in weeks. Reporters tried to surround him, but he said nothing. He walked away, his heart full of unanswered questions. All he carried in his pocket was the letter she had written, and the memory of a woman who had once rolled into his forge, smiling through pain, hiding behind the lie of a wheelchair, but loving him, he now realized, with the truest part of her soul. When Chittera returned to Obel, the village welcomed him like a king who had gone to war and survived. The children ran to him, shouting his name. The elders shook his hands. Even the same boys who had once mocked Amarachi now offered apologies. But Chittera wasn't thinking of reputation. He was thinking of redemption. In the quiet forge behind his family compound, he sat staring at the bracelet he once carved for Amma. His tools lay untouched. The fire in his forge had long gone cold. Mama Ifeoma's package had reached him the previous night, containing the full file of Adiz's plot, the recorded confession, the video footage, and most painfully, Amarachi's handwritten note. "I never lied to hurt you. I only wanted to be seen. And the moment you saw me, I forgot I was pretending." It was the first time he cried, not from anger, but from the aching realization that she had fallen into his life with a heart as broken as his. One afternoon, he returned to the very spot where he had first found her under the mango tree. The breeze whispered against the leaves like old memories calling him back. He sat in silence, trying to replay every moment between them, from the books she carried to the way her eyes would light up when he talked about fire and iron. He remembered pushing her wheelchair, laughing at her sarcastic remarks, arguing about what love meant. She had built a lie to escape the world that wounded her. But within that lie, she had shown him the only love that ever felt real. Could he forgive her? Could he walk into the mess she carried and still choose her? His hands ached from holding back emotion. But deep within him, something softened. She had not betrayed him out of malice. She had loved him, and feared he wouldn't love her back if he knew the truth. And that fear wasn't weakness, it was a mirror of his own. The next day, he packed a small bag and left for Lagos. When he arrived at the estate, the staff paused in awe. They moved aside like waves parting for a storm. Amarachi was in the garden, where she always found peace. When she turned and saw him, she froze. Her eyes widened. Then, slowly, she rose to her feet, not from shock, but from reverence. "I didn't think you'd come," she said softly. He took a step closer, his voice even. I didn't think I would either. Silence stretched between them like a bridge. Then he pulled something from his pocket, a bent bracelet he had once made for her. I thought I'd throw this away, he said. But I didn't. Because even if you lied about your name, you never lied about your heart. Amarachi's voice cracked as she whispered, I'm sorry. And Chitara, with tears in his eyes, replied, I know. And I forgive you. But I didn't come to forgive. I came to see if the woman I fell for still wanted to build something real. And in that moment, her tears became laughter. Because yes, she did. The garden at the back of the Okoye estate had always been symbolic. Once, it was the quiet place where Amarachi hid from her father's expectations. Later, it became a space where she reflected on her fall from grace. But now, standing there with Chitara beside her, it had transformed into something entirely new, a place of rebirth. The same girl who once rolled quietly through Obel in a wheelchair was now standing with her head high, stripped of titles, fears, and lies. The journey from disguise to truth had been long and treacherous, but it had carved something unbreakable in her. Chitara looked at her with that same raw focus he used at the forge, as though he were still shaping something with fire. When I first met you, I didn't see a cripple, he said. I saw someone hiding, but I didn't know you were hiding from a whole empire. Amarachi laughed softly, wiping tears from the corner of her eyes. And I didn't know I'd fall for the only man who'd never ask what I owned, but always challenged what I believed. The breeze swirled gently through the mango trees, and a nearby bench became their shared confession space. They sat, shoulders brushing, the silence between them no longer heavy, but comforting. Amarachi reached into her purse and pulled out a small photo, a worn picture of her mother holding her as a child. She told me, before she died, that love isn't what people give when they want something. It's what they offer when they know the truth. Chitara took the photo in his hands and nodded. She was right. And so were you to fight for your truth, even when it hurt. They sat there, speaking in tones only their hearts could fully understand. There was no need for declarations. Their journey had already spoken louder than any vow. Later that evening, Amarachi stood in the garden alone, barefoot, surrounded by fireflies. The estate was quiet, as though even the walls were breathing again. For a long time, she stared up at the sky, letting the stars remind her how small, and yet how powerful a single choice could be. When she heard footsteps behind her, she didn't turn. You're late, she teased gently. Chitara's voice came from behind, steady and low. I had to stop by the forge. She turned, only to see him walking toward her, dressed simply, but with eyes burning with certainty. In his hand was a small box. She froze. He reached her, opened the lid, and inside was a forged iron ring, smooth, shaped like a vine, not flashy, but beautiful in its story. I made this the day I thought I lost you, he said. But I didn't. I just lost the part of me that was scared of loving something real. He knelt slowly. Amarachi, will you build a new fire with me? Not one of metal or lies, but of truth. Tears fell down Amarachi's face before her voice found its way to her lips. She knelt with him, her hands trembling as they cupped his. Yes, she whispered. Yes, not because I feel like I deserve you, but because I want to deserve the life we build together. And in that quiet, star-lit garden, beneath the tree where dreams once withered, two souls who had fought their way through fire, deceit, and heartbreak found their peace in each other. The staff that once whispered in corners now watched from balconies, cheering quietly, their hearts full. Chief Okoye, standing by a window, turned to Mama Ifeoma and said, "She's her mother's daughter, after all." The maid smiled, holding back her tears. "No," she replied. "She's her own woman, and she became that not by wealth, but by pain." The following weeks became a celebration not just of love, but of legacy. Amarachi and Chitara returned to Obel, this time not as strangers or secrets, but as builders. Together, they opened a skill acquisition center named the Forge of Truth, dedicated to training rural youth in metalwork, crafts, and digital enterprise. The same people who once mocked Amarachi's wheelchair now came to learn from the blacksmith who had once shaped steel with bare hands and reshaped a billionaire's heart with his honesty. She no longer wore disguises. No more lies. No more apologies. She taught young girls how to own their worth, how to speak with their full chest, and how to never apologize for demanding more than survival. Chitara, in his quiet strength, became a mentor, not because of fame, but because of the example his life had become. From prison to purpose. From betrayal to blessing. On the day of their village wedding, Amarachi wore a simple cream gown with blue coral beads, and Chitara wore a hand-woven agbada made by the youth at their center. No paparazzi. No headlines. Just joy. Just truth. As they exchanged their vows under a mango tree. Yes, that mango tree. Amarachi's voice trembled only once. "You didn't save me, Chitara," she said. "You reminded me that I didn't need saving. I only needed to be real." And as the crowd erupted into applause as firecrackers lit up the dusk sky, as children danced barefoot in the sand, the story that began with a lie rolled straight into a truth so beautiful, even the stars seemed to weep. Because this was a love no one saw coming. Not the world, not her father, not even Amarachi herself. But there it stood, forged through suffering, built on the ashes of pain, and crowned, not with gold, but with the fire of endurance, the sword of forgiveness, and the vow of forever. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel Tochi Stories for more.